welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things relating to your well-being, including interviews with experts in the fields of nutrition, physical and mental health, and my 5-Minute Food Fact series. I am Amanda Hayes, your host, a nutritionist with a passion for well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I will mention that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast is not intended to be used to treat, cure or prevent injuries or medical conditions, and is not a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today I am here with someone truly extraordinary, someone who has accomplished many epic feats. She is Katie Sarah. We've not met face to face, but funnily enough, I discovered that Katie lives in the next suburb. What a small world. Katie is a business owner. Her company, Sarah Mountain Journeys, specialises in customised adventurous expeditions to destinations such as the Himalayas, Tanzania and South America. She's a mother, a triathlete and a mountaineer. Katie has summited Everest, plus she's the first woman in the world to complete the 7-7. And Katie will let you know what that is during our chat. And to top it off, she simply takes it all in her stride and she is delightful to chat with. Hi, Katie. Welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. So, Katie, you've had a very interesting and dynamic career, and I'd really like to hear something about it. I believe you've an undergraduate and master's degree in finance and accounting. Did you work in that area after graduating from university?
Yes, so for my first job out of uni was in superannuation, and that was in more of a master trust type of super fund. And then after that was working in self-managed superannuation. So yes, I continued the sort of business and finance side of it for about 15 years.
Oh, right. Did you enjoy that?
My first job was in a really big organisation and it was a big bureaucracy and not so much, I have to admit. But my second job was in in fact, it was tiny business when I started. It was the 2 directors and myself, and they were just wonderful, great fun people to work for and with. And I basically saw over 12 years, I saw that business grow from the 3 of us to there was over 50 staff.
Wow, that would have been
at which point it was great. And being a part of that, it felt like my baby as well. And it basically had got to the point where I said to the directors that I can only work part-time. I have 3 young children because we had the 3 boys in almost under 3 years. You need, with over 50 staff, you need more than I can give you in the time. I was only working 2 days a week. And so I sadly actually resigned from that role.
Yeah, it's probably a good way to leave a job. I had a similar situation where it was precipitated because we ended up moving to Hong Kong, but I had a job I really loved, and the only reason I said goodbye was because we were leaving. And again, it was a small company when I joined, and it grew and it had been taken over and things. So I felt very connected to that company as well. But, life goes on.
Well, it does. And it was the right time for me. Get somebody else in there that could give them more time because the role needed that. So I remained friends with the directors, and it then grew to over 100 people and was then sold. So it was a very successful business.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
great.
feel.
So then you worked, I believe, in adventure travel, and you took over an adventure travel company, which is now Sarah Mountain Journeys, and that specialises in customised adventurous expeditions, destinations such as the Himalayas, Tanzania and South America. So after working in the superannuation businesses, you obviously had a good skill set to run your own business. So was starting up or taking over that business a natural progression for you, or was it a big leap?
So it was natural progression just because, so I didn't go straight from finance and superannuation to owning the adventure travel business.
Here, Katie explains that she was working for the business for 4 years before she took it over, and that during that time she was learning the business.
I'll take it over and run the business and continue doing what I'm doing. So it was nerve-wracking being the owner because of the liability and responsibility.
Yeah, of course.
But I knew what I was doing. I knew all of the trips. I knew the business because I've been doing it for 4 years. So yes, natural progression, a little bit of a leap to take it over and be the owner. But no, I wasn't ready to stop working in that area. And by taking over the business, I could continue some of the wonderful relationships I'd made with some of the people overseas that we'd been working with. The ones I didn't like, I got rid of and got new ones. So it was particularly in Nepal. The guys that I was working with there are just amazing, and I still work with them. And I've expanded the guys that I know over there and have many options for amazing trips. So
I know that organising treks is an enormous responsibility. I've done a few myself over the years, and it's such an expansive job, I think, for example, the trek leader themselves. They're on duty 24 hours a day. They have to negotiate so many obstacles, physical challenges, cultural challenges, keeping the team, the local people, the paying customers well, managing group dynamics. It's a huge job, I think. So have you led treks yourself? Have you led a group of people?
Yes, absolutely. So when I was second guide on Everest in 2010, which pretty much meant that I was guiding the group all the way up until extreme altitude.
Wow.
So at that point, obviously I hadn't summited and I wasn't an extreme altitude guide, then I wouldn't have taken, it would have been irresponsible of me to be being responsible for somebody else. Have my hands looking after myself. So I've certainly guided treks and trekking peaks and a number of trips like that.
What do you think are some of the most difficult challenges when you're taking a group like that?
The challenges are when people will not be completely open with you. I guess my business, because it has always been quite a small business, I've always had, to varying degrees, if they're Adelaide people, then I can actually have a face-to-face personal relationship with them before the trip. But even interstate guests, I've had a lot of communication with them before the trip. So that means we at least to some degree or other know each other. So it means by the time we get on the trip, if I'm the guide, then I'm hoping that relationship and trust has been established. So, and as I try and tell them, it's, look, you cannot reveal something to me that I haven't already seen or heard. Honestly, I challenge you to surprise me. I don't challenge you to gross me out, and it takes a lot. But so I really do need the clients to be open with me, and when they are not, or when they just simply refuse to listen, that makes it extremely challenging, because I'm not just trying to be horrible. I'm trying to keep them not only safe but alive. And I think I'm saying to you, you need to tell me if you've got a really bad headache, or if your guts are just going each way.
Yes.
Don't really want to know about it, but I need to know about it. I need to know these things, and then we can deal with it and look after you. And when people don't share that, and it can either be because they're embarrassed, and it's often, I think, as I said, usually I've got a good enough relationship with the clients that they're not terribly embarrassed. I've had blokes sort of just sidle up and go, oh, look, I have to tell you. So it's often that they're scared that I will turn them around, and the thing is, I always try and tell them that, if you share it with me early enough, we might be able to deal with it and you can keep going. If you leave it too long, worst case scenario, you can die. Best case scenario is that you're definitely out. We have to send you down. So that's the challenge, when people don't, for mistaken reasons, or they think they're trying to help their partner, and so they'll push themselves that little bit more. And it's like, you can be a gentleman at sea level, not here. If your wife is doing better than you, don't carry extra stuff for her because you're a lovely man who's a gentleman. No, if you're actually struggling, don't do that.
I know, and I think it's a bit hard to appreciate when you're down here at sea level what it can be like up there and what an impact the altitude can have on people. And also I think that some people who are fit and young and proud can sometimes, as you say, be a bit embarrassed to admit that they don't feel great.
Absolutely, and they can be the worst because they're used to going fast. And when they've got some old chip like me saying, look, dude, you've got to slow down. Oh, no. No, actually, you do. Your body doesn't know what has hit it and what you're trying to do to it. When you've been to altitude a few times, then you do get a bit of it's easier to deal with it because you do it as second nature. But first time, you need to listen to somebody, hey, slow down. Just let your body take on board what you're doing to it. And if you do that, it will in most cases. If you take it slowly enough, if you do all the things that I'm telling you to do, like hydrate and eat, then pretty basic, food, water, don't try and run, then most people are fine. Some people are not, and it's not because they're weak. It's just because something either they're harboring a bug and that might kick in, or they might be genetically predisposed to not cope to altitude, and that is possible.
If you're not leading the trek yourself, you mentioned earlier you've got some great relationships with people, particularly in Nepal. So how do you find those people that fit with the profile of your company?
So as I mentioned, because I worked for 4 years in the business, I established relationships through that period. Then from there, it's been very much either, so for clients, I will if I'm going to a new area that I haven't operated in before or completely different type of trip that I haven't operated, then I will reach out to my network and say, look, I want to do this, I want to go to this place. So someone that I trust, can you recommend somebody? And then I will always go myself. Might take a few guinea pigs, and that could be experienced clients, it could be my family. So I wouldn't take new clients that are new to this type of experience with a new operator. But I've got some clients that are like, oh, that destination. So Bhutan was a prime example. I hadn't operated there. My friend, it's right next door to Nepal. My guy in Nepal said, yes, I know this operator. So I said, cool. I've got several very experienced clients that they just went, whoa, Bhutan, would love to have a crack. Okay, fine. We understand that it's not an operator, it wouldn't be loose, but because I've had that recommendation, but there may be little things that, and there were, when I come back with new clients, then I would want to say, we need to do this, we need to do that. And so I work that out by doing the trip myself.
And just to digress a little bit, you said sometimes you take your family as guinea pigs. So you've got 3 boys. Are they into climbing and trekking?
So the 3 boys have quite different, and I guess maybe it's because they're all boys and they're quite close in age, but they've very much picked their own area that they really like. So the oldest, he does altitude really well, like disgustingly well, and he's 6'2", so he's getting annoyingly strong and fit. So he does altitude well. So mountains are what he wants to do. So he's done Kilimanjaro with me. He did the Mexican volcanoes, and then I took him to a 6,300 metre peak in Nepal last year.
Which one was that? Which peak?
Very unknown. It's called Tengkoma Peak, and it's near Kangchenjunga, so in the east of Nepal. Amazing trip, just so remote and untouched. It's nothing like Annapurna or Everest Base Camp. Just we saw some other people, but not many. It was
how incredible.
Really lovely. And no one had climbed this peak for I can't remember how many years, and I don't think any Australians ever had climbed it because it was remote.
Wow!
So it was a really good, fun, cool trip. So that's my oldest. My middle son he likes climbing. So we go to the climbing gym, or he goes with his mates, and his mother gets invited with he and his mates sometimes. I'm stoked about it.
Kudos to you.
The 23-year-old boys are happy for mum to come along. It's kind of cool. I can still climb better than them too. Only just. They're young and they're strong. So he's the climber, and then the youngest one loves trekking. So he's picking up cycling as well. He may well come and do, I don't know if he wants to do a half Ironman. He doesn't run, but he swims and cycles. So we might find him whatever they're called, aquathon, or the swim run. So they very much pick their own thing.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Well, they've been exposed to lots of options, so that's brilliant. They're lucky. And I also believe, Katie, that you're winding back a bit on the Sarah Mountain Journey activities, and you're focusing a bit more on charity-based fundraising treks. Is that correct?
Yes. So, I mean, even before coronavirus, I was pretty much deciding that I've got some wonderful contacts in a few different charities that were keen to do charity treks, and I'm very happy to use my contacts and organise, facilitate, lead those trips as a fundraising trek. But other than that, pretty much won't be offering any more trips for more public groups. As I said, very much more focusing not only on just treks for not-for-profits, but I'm also on the board of a few and have more governance and C-level involvement with their activities. So focusing on that at the moment.
So are there any not-for-profits that you'd like to mention that you're involved with?
I'm involved with several. So obviously, having mentioned Bhutan before, that was for James and Mina Muki and their Sight for All organisation, and that's just one that I've known James and Mina since our boys were all small. Stoked to be involved with that, and we are planning, hopefully next year, subject to how international travel goes. We're talking about Mongolia for their next trip. So that'll be...
Yeah, that'd be terrific.
A really amazing destination. I'm also on the board of Guide Dogs Sant, which is a wonderful organisation. They just do such amazing work, and they've got beautiful dogs. What is there anything better than that?
Yeah. That's a charity that is close to my heart, because my brother-in-law lost his vision about 7 years ago now. So he lives in Melbourne. He's married to my sister, and he has an amazing guide dog, and it's changed their life.
Oh, some of the stories for the dogs. So Guide Dogs SA does not only dogs for vision impaired clients, but also autism assistance dogs, and also just, I can't remember, I should know what they're called, but also dogs. So we have a couple of dogs placed in schools, which can help with the children. And we also have our wonderful court companion. That's Zero, I believe, our court companion dog. And some of the stories are just, there were one or two, especially the autism dog, but also then with the court companion dog, that are just, I'm not a very emotional person, but wow, it almost brought a tear to my eye, and certainly the heartstrings were just, oh wow, what the difference these dogs can make for a whole family when they've got a child that's autistic, or in the court where there's a child having to give witness as to terrible, terrible, terrible things that have happened, and they've got this beautiful dog Zero to bury their face in the fair and get through.
Oh wow!
Just the difference these dogs make. It's incredible. So I'm so proud to be involved with that.
It's a really, really worthwhile charity, isn't it? Because clearly you don't like to sit still. You're always doing something. I believe you're studying a Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science. That clearly aligns well with your interest in physical activity and climbing and trekking. So what prompted you to do that?
I've pretty much studied something my whole life. So I started my master's in accounting when our youngest son was 1.
So you had tons of free time then.
And I think I was marathon running at that point. So I've always studied something, forever. I actually started at university probably about 12, oh no, longer than that, 15 years ago at Uni of SA, this same degree. But that was on campus and just wasn't able to work for me. So I gave up then, and then that sort of around all of that, I've done other courses as well. I started a master's in linguistics. That one I did give up as well. It was fascinating and I loved it just for the intellectual stimulation, but it was terribly expensive and I just couldn't justify it.
It is expensive studying. I've gone back and done a master's in nutrition, and you kind of need to know that you're going to use it, I think.
You do. So the sports science, I've gone back to undergraduate, which of course is a fraction of the cost. It is very much due to interest, all of that stuff.
Yes.
There are a couple of areas that are sort of, and it's more research. I couldn't be a personal trainer or a trainer. I don't think I've got the patience. But the research side of it, and I've done a couple of assignments based around training and altitude and the effects of hyperbaric chambers and normobaric chambers and that sort of stuff, that there's a possibility that I could do something down the track.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It'd be great to hear your perspective as a woman who's had a productive and interesting career, and you've managed to combine your passion and your business skills. Do you have any advice for younger women who are coming out of university at the moment in terms of their career progression?
Just seizing every opportunity. And I think that's probably not even just for young women just coming out of university. I think it's for everybody. And to have an opportunity, and actually maybe it is more for young women, because I do believe that women can be more self-effacing in so much as they will see an opportunity and think of themselves, no, I don't think I could do that, or do I have the skills? Give it a crack. Why not?
Yeah. In a way, you could think, what's the worst that could happen? You decide actually.
Yeah, particularly when you're young. Give it a go. You might make a bit of a fool of yourself. I have actually done this with a couple of our boys, and I've made lists. I'm a Virgo. I'm a bit of a list and spreadsheet person. When you're thinking of an opportunity like that, even just to write it down and go, well, actually, what is the worst that could happen? Is someone going to die? Am I going to die? If you can cross that off, then you're already on the way to thinking it could be a good idea.
Yeah. And I guess in your case, when you've put yourself in positions where you potentially could die, taking on some kind of new job or something like that probably is just really nothing. It's easy.
It definitely puts things in perspective. And I think, but you also do need to temper that, and very much, I think in everything as well, and certainly in what I do, but for everybody, you need to be self-aware and know what your limitations and abilities actually are. But don't underestimate yourself either.
For all the young women who are listening, don't underestimate yourselves. And so now let's talk about the most exciting thing about our chat today, climbing and trekking. So what was it that drew you to trekking and climbing in the first place?
So climbing I only discovered in my mid-30s. Came to it, or actually became aware that it was something that you could do relatively late in life, which is why I'm so stoked to have been able to expose the boys, at least to know that it's there. I was in my mid-30s before I did a trek in the Flinders, and came across this big wall that had all this chalk on it, and we actually, and this is the first time I'd abseiled, absolutely terrified, until I was actually there going down thinking, oh, wow, this is kind of cool. And then seeing the chalk on the wall, realising that now that actually is even better, because this is fun. But, something physically hard where you're working out the limits of your body and hauling yourself up this cliff. And so that made me come home from that weekend going, oh, I want to try that. And that's where the climbing came from. But I would say that, I mean, even in my early 20s, I was doing short triathlons. And then by my late or mid-20s, I'd done an Olympic distance. And then I had 3 children. And then in my early 30s, went on, picked up triathlon again. I think still short distance, but then running. So marathon, did a couple of marathons in my early 30s. And then mid-30s discovered climbing. So that's when that took over.
So you clearly got the bug. So how do you actually train for climbing? Where do you go and how do you learn the skills?
So it depends really on what you're looking at doing. So for a trek and a trekking peak, you really just need to be fit and strong and be able to be on your feet for hours and hours, day after day. So that can really just be and triathlon type training is actually really excellent for that sort of thing. It's because you just want to have that endurance, then running is always an efficient, brilliant way to exercise. Unfortunately, I've got a fused ankle, so I'm not really actually meant to run too much.
We'll get to that one a bit later.
But that was post-marathon. That was when I started climbing the ankle. But to actually train for most of the trekking peaks, then it is just cross-training, getting your legs strong and being able to go for days and days. So certainly to start with, I was doing a lot of long walks and hikes in the hills. These days I don't do that so much just because I've got so many kilometres in my legs that I really don't need to.
Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit more efficient in the training that I do. So it'll still be cycling and running and a hard, fast walk in the hills. So I'll find a steep hill and go up and down that if I need to for a fast and efficient session. So that's for trekking and trekking peaks. For extreme altitude, you really just need to do that more and harder because it's just keeping yourself, being able to keep yourself upright at extreme altitude is just hard.
What about the mountaineering side of things?
So the mountaineering skills, I'm not an extremely technical climber. So, I mean, I can do technical stuff to a degree, but I'm not highly, highly, highly technical. So Everest is not, I mean, it's crevasses and ladders and very exposed slopes and that sort of thing. I have done ice climbing, so crampons and ice boots and that sort of thing.
Yep.
But I'm certainly not a high-level ice climber. Same with rock climbing. I just picked it up far too old. So I can do a reasonable grade, but I'll never be able to do grades 24 or 6.
You'll never be Alex
Oh,
Honnold.
goodness, no. I went and saw that movie and I took 2 of my children with me and they said that, yep, that was a great, amazing movie, but even more amazing was watching my face. I know he survives, but just still watching, oh, I'm bored.
Yeah, he's extraordinary, isn't he?
So yes, I'm definitely not that skilled, nor that crazy.
No, he's out of the box. I think he's incredible. But in terms of mountaineering and ice climbing and things, do you learn that? Whilst you're there?
Pretty much, yes. There's not really any. I mean, I've done a technical mountaineering course in New Zealand, but that was after my first trip to Everest, sort of the part before the horse.
Oh, right.
But most of those skills, you start on the high, easier peaks, and you learn how you can cope and adjust at moderately high altitude, and then gain some skills and just make sure that you can look after yourself with ropes and crampons and all that sort of stuff.
You just make it sound so easy, but it isn't.
It's certainly doing the trips and spending the time there. So, and I'm sure you're going to ask about it, but that was very much the issue with my first Everest trip in 2007. I simply didn't have the experience or the skills, and it meant that at all times I had enough skills to be safe, but I wasn't efficient, and so I just wasn't able to keep going, and I just broken my ankle. So
a minor problem. So on that particular trip, then you did make it up pretty high, though. Where did you get to on Mount Everest?
So that was a very bizarre part of my life. I had just summited my first mountain, which was a 6,500 metre peak in Bolivia. And then a couple of months later, I broke my ankle and was rehabilitating that, and then had just started work for the business that I now own. And in April, so a few months later, this is in about December or January, in April we were running a trip for an Everest Summit team. And at that point, the guy who owned the business was away, but he rang me up and said, "Oh, have you thought about why don't you just come on the Everest trip? See how the expedition runs and what goes on. Great work experience." I'm still in a moon boot at that point. And going, okay, yep, great, I'm in. Sounds good. But definitely the intention. I'd summited one 6,500 metre peak. So the intention of that trip was absolutely to see how it all worked, because it's a massive logistical extravaganza, the whole Everest thing. So to expect to help in Adelaide setting it all up and putting it together, and then in the field was definitely part of it. And then for me personally, to have a crack at getting to around 7,000 metres, which seemed like a reasonable goal. An extra 500 metres than what I'd achieved before, maybe a little bit higher, but expected maybe only a couple of 100 metres, but go along and see what I could do. So, yes, I did keep on going more than a couple of 100 metres above 7,000. I actually ended up getting to 8,450 of the 8,848 total.
Yeah, so the goal of that trip then was not actually to summit Everest, your goal, your personal goal.
That was just to... Yeah, it didn't seem in any way feasible that I could aim for the summit. As I said, I'd only summited one peak. I'd done some rock climbing by that point, so I had some rope skills. But my third day ever in crampons was at 6,600 metres on Everest. So that is not a skill base that is what you need for Everest. So it definitely was not something that I in any way thought would happen. An Everest summit.
But you did go back several years later. So on that first trip, did that ignite a passion to want to summit Everest, or is that something you've always wanted to do?
Oh, absolutely not. It was on that trip that, I couldn't train because I had the broken ankle, which was mostly but badly healed by the time I went on the trip. So with a few months of pretty much almost no training prior to the trip, no specific training for it, and only one peak prior, to have got that close to the summit just made me actually think, well, okay, I think I need to.
Yeah, what if I put in the work?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously need to get some skills and then the training, and I actually could I do have a decent chance of safely getting to the summit and back down again if I go back again. So yes.
And you did. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On that particular trip, that was in 2010, did you approach from Nepal or Tibet?
So both times it was from Tibet, the north side.
How did you deal with, on not just that particular trip, but any trip at altitude, how do you deal with altitude? Do you take Diamox?
I think maybe one trip. I know that can't remember why, but we had to crank up. We had to gain some altitude pretty quickly, so I did take a couple of half Diamox on that trip. Generally, no, I do not take it. And for my clients, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I cannot go against their doctor's opinion, but I'm being very careful what I say. My approach is that it is not. It's a prophylactic. So the idea is that when I'm guiding, I would prefer that my clients were not taking Diamox, because it just gives us, if they've got no symptoms, then they don't need to be taking it. And it gives me so much more medically and pharmaceutically to play with if they do start getting symptoms. We can start with if they start getting headaches or the minor symptoms and they won't go away, Panadol or whatever, then I can start with a half dose of Diamox. Does it work? We go up to a full dose. All that sort of stuff, that there's more, it gives me some more leeway to be able to salvage this person's trip and get them better and have them keep going. So I generally prefer to not just take it just in case you're going to not be well. You'll never know if you needed it or not if you just take it.
Did you need or take oxygen on your way up to the summit? I think that's fairly common these days, isn't it?
By far the vast majority on any 8,000 metre peak will use supplementary oxygen. On summit day at a minimum. On Everest, certainly because it's so high. Yes, we were using oxygen from 7,500 metres.
And what were the conditions like on the day that you summited?
So our summit day, it did go reasonably smoothly. The night before, we were at the 7,600 metre camp, and there was a huge dump of snow, which was worrying.
Oh, no.
It was almost, as we're lying in the tent that night, it was like, oh dear, are we going to have to, is this enough snow and bad enough that we're actually going to have to abort? Because at that point you can still turn around and you've salvaged enough, basically oxygen supplies, that's the main thing, that you could have another crack a bit later. But it's not ideal because we sort of started on the summit push and you do expend energy to get to that point. And then, but it would have been salvageable if we'd done it, if we'd had to at that point. We didn't. And the snow was certainly pretty deep, and certainly on actual summit day, so the next 2 days later, there were places where the rope was buried, and so I always remember our Sirdar, the head Sherpa, he's just bouncing around at 8,600 metres on this slope, refixing the rope and pulling it out and getting more rope out. Like he's pulling rope out of his backpack. Wow. It's like, Namgil, what are you doing? Got all this weight, and he's just amazing bloke. But so we were able to continue, got through that once Namgil had fixed the ropes for us. And so the actual weather wasn't too bad. There was a lot of snow, and that slowed us down at one point. And then by the time we got to the summit, the wind was picking up. So we didn't, you would only normally spend 15, 20 minutes on the summit in any case. You do need to get your photos and pat yourself on the back and then turn around. But it was starting to pick up. You
said earlier that you're not a very emotional person, but how did you feel when you were on the roof of the world there?
So relieved. I really think that was the most, that was the strongest emotion, just because I got there this time after the first time where it was like, oh, I'm so close, but I cannot keep going, so I need to turn around. That time I was like, oh, I've made it. I don't need to do this again, thank goodness. And I'm feeling really good. So I'm fine for the way back down, because, of course, getting to the top's only half the trip.
Yeah, I think people probably forget that sometimes, don't they?
They're still on the side of the mountain, sadly.
On the day that you summited, was it busy up there?
So the north side would, in a normal year, in fact, pretty much every year, has about probably a third of the people that you get on the south side. So all of the images that everybody has seen of those horrific queues are always on the Nepal south side. And certainly when I was on the north side, we also put off our summit day until later as well. So there's on the north side, it's bizarre how almost predictable it is that there's normally at least 2 or 3 windows of a few days. And so we were checking the weather to make sure that what windows were happening, and we aimed for the third window. And so on that day, I counted up at one point, I think, including climbing Sherpas, there were from the high camp, which is at about 8,100, 200 metres. So for that day, from there up and down again, there were approximately 35 people on the mountain going and doing what we were doing.
Compared with the photos that you referenced from last year's season, that doesn't seem all that many. That horrible queue, that traffic jam last year going up to the summit, that was just shocking to watch on television. It got a lot of publicity, but I think it could have a good result, because I think now the Nepalese government is implementing some more stringent conditions on people wanting permits to climb Mount Everest. For example, I think there's a stipulation that they have to have summited at least one other 8,000 metre peak. Do you have a view on all of that?
I wish it was another 8,000 metre peak. I believe it's only a 6,000 metre peak, I think. I haven't looked at that, unless they brought out something new recently. As far as I'm aware, it was like one other moderately high peak. Another 8,000 metre peak would be ideal.
It'd be a bit of a game changer, I think.
It would, and it's actually the perfect way to do it. It really is. And I mean, brilliantly, it also brings in more revenue for the Nepali government, but all power to them. I mean, it is a perfect way to get people to actually be more serious and not just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to do one mountain in my life and I'm going to do Everest. It shouldn't be like that. It is so much safer if you actually work up. And so obviously, I'm obviously saying all of this having not done that with my first approach to Everest. But as I said, my first goal was only meant to be lower. But certainly, and so from that experience, I can categorically say you just so need to have the experience on how to look after yourself. I can proudly say that I was able to pretty much be mostly self-sufficient on the mountain. I mean, nothing went pear-shaped and nothing went wrong. Pretty much the whole time I had my personal Sherpa with me, so I had a Sherpa in case things did go wrong to be able to assist me, only on summit day, so only from 8,100 metres and above. He helped me change over my oxygen cylinder at whatever point it was, halfway through summit day, and that was about it. Other than that, gave me a bit of a hand, I think clipping in at one point because I've only got little hands and these big mittens. Right. I do not believe that if you have to be pulled, pushed, carried in any way, shape or form, then you just totally shouldn't be there.
Puts other people's lives at risk, and that's not fair, just to achieve, a pie in the sky sort of dream if mountain climbing's not what you've been doing. How long did it take you on summit day? How many hours does it take to get from the final camp up to the top and back?
So I left camp at, I think it was approximately 2:30 in the morning and summited a bit before, around 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. I haven't got my certificate here. It was, so it would have been 6-7 hours or so.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, when you think 6 or 7 hours to go, what is it, 300 and something metres? It just highlights how difficult that is.
So it's about 600 or 700 metres. And actually, so for that day, there was another there was only 35 people, but there was an English team of 4 and they were moving frighteningly slowly. And so we stopped on the second step, which is one of the, sort of like the Hillary step on the Nepal side, but the second step. We had to wait for an hour for these people to get through the ropes. Like it was totally impossible to be able to go around or avoid them. So we were standing there in one spot waiting for an hour.
Oh, how frustrating.
And at that point, it's because it's relatively early in the day, it's very much, and like with the images of the South Side last year, it's putting us to an extent at risk, but certainly our summit chance is at risk because you get held up for long enough and you have to turn around because you're going to run out of oxygen or run out of daylight or whatever. So we had to wait for an hour for them.
How cold was it?
I believe from memory the forecast was around the high -20s with wind chill certainly once we got, because some of it is a little bit sheltered. Once we got out into the wind, certainly on the summit, it would have been colder than that.
I guess a lot of it, I think, is, or not a lot of it, some of it is having the right gear,
completely,
isn't it?
yes. It is so something that you cannot get the cheap version of. Your gloves, your boots, your down suit, you have to get the good stuff. Otherwise, there are bits of your body that won't come home.
You are the first woman in the world who's achieved the 7-7. So can you explain to our listeners what that actually is?
Yeah, so the 7 summits is something that quite a few people have done. So the 7 summits is the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. So then the 7-7 is then adding to that the 7 highest volcanoes on each continent. And then if you expand that just for fun, you can add, so the Explorers Grand Slam is, so the classic Explorers Grand Slam is the 7 summits, just the 7 summits, and a ski of the last degree to each of the poles. So yes, I'm the first woman in the world, and I think I was about the 8th person ever to have done the 7-7. And then, so I did the ski the last degree to the South Pole almost a year and a half ago now, so December, 18 months ago. And then I've now tried for 2 years in a row to go to the North Pole and have been thwarted by varying things out of my control.
Yeah, like coronavirus.
I was 5 days from getting on the plane for the North Pole.
Oh, no. But you wouldn't actually want to end up being stuck there, would you? If you had gone.
To be honest, we were going to Norway and then up to the sea ice. So as long as you didn't get sick while you're actually on the sea ice, Norway, brilliant first world country, got it on the way back. And I was more than happy to quarantine for as long as the state government required on the way back. But, it all came into play before we even left the country this year. So, and last year it was politics.
Does that mean you'll be trying again or next year or when you can?
Definitely when we can. I am hoping next year, but I'm actually not counting on it. I think everything's so uncertain at the moment that international travel next April, we'll see. I'm hoping.
Who knows?
Who knows, exactly. So.
If you achieve that, will that then be the Grand Slam?
Yes.
In terms of the 7-7, how long has it taken you, how many years to achieve that?
So I did my first of the 7 summits in 2000 and I was just before New Year's Eve, 2009, so very end of 2008, and I finished the 7 summits in 2013. And then,
wow.
So I just had, it was one of those things where it wasn't actually my goal.
Did it become your goal along the way when you thought, wow, I'm actually close to doing this?
Sort of did, but it gained momentum because if I wanted to organise a fun trip with friends, I had a few climbing friends that were on a 7 summits mission. So if I came up with some obscure peak in Nepal, they might be, but if I said, let's go to Aconcagua, right, yep, cool, let's go, because that ticks off one of their goals. So certainly there are a couple of trips that, I want great fun people that I know really well to climb with. Okay, we'll go and do one of the 7 summits because I know they'll make the time and we can do it. And then by the end it was, very much,
I'm so close. I might as well.
And I think the last of the 7 summits for me were Denali and Elbrus. And Denali was a really amazing experience because, and I mean, I love working with the Sherpas and the guys in South America. They look after you. They are just brilliant. Denali was different because we were in the United States, and it was a self-guided trip. So I was not guiding my friends. We were just 3 mates climbing the peak. And so we had to do it. We had to carry everything. We had to do absolutely everything. We had no guides, porters, Sherpas to do all this stuff, or mules or yaks or anything. It was all on my back. So
wow.
For I think to be able to look back and go, yes, I did it, I can do it, vastly overrated. I'm very happy to have a yak to carry lots of gear. Bring them on. But having done that and knowing that I could was something that was very satisfying.
Do you have, and this is probably a difficult question to answer, but do you have a highlight?
Actually, in fact, it was my first of the 7 summits. It was Vincent down in Antarctica. It was a trip that was very different to a normal mountain because we had to it was all down to us. There was no one else within hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometres. It was a team of 8. So we had to haul all of our gear on sleds. No dogs allowed down in Antarctica. So being on the little Twin Otter with the team of 8 and our sleds and what looked like tons of gear, I remember sitting on that plane thinking, I just don't know. Like that first, it's not something you can do here in Adelaide, to have a 50 plus kilo sled behind you on your skis and pull it for a length of time.
Yeah.
But, I do like haul tyres and all that ridiculous looking stuff, but it's still completely different to pulling an actual sled. So I'm sitting on this little plane thinking, that first step, am I going to be able to pull this thing? Am I actually going to move at the first step, let alone the kilometres that I'm going to have to haul it after that? And am I actually going to be able to do it? Or am I going to be letting the whole team down? And I remember that just vividly sitting there. But I did. I got off the plane and then I could pull the sled. And then so on that trip, the highlight that I'm working up to was we get to the summit and one of the guys who I ended up doing all of the 7 summits with, we had about 4 of us approaching the summit together, pretty much together, but we were just in a line. And he turns around and he's this 6'7" Australian German guy that can drink his body weight in beer, and he's a wonderful, wonderful friend. And he turns to me and says, Katie, you've got to be first on the summit. Power to weight ratio, you're just a legend. Off you go. And I was like, I was so proud of that. It was just like, yeah, I'm the 5'0" chick, only female as always on the team, and this wonderful man who has become a very good friend. Go on, you deserve first foot on the summit.
Oh, that's incredible. I think the friendships that you form on trips like that, where you're dealing with extreme circumstances there, I mean, there's nothing to hide, is there? So you get the whole person. So I think they're very strong, those bonds you create.
Definitely, because you see the absolute best and the absolute worst of people. And those ones that just shine in those sorts of circumstances.
Have you ever experienced a really dangerous or scary situation that's really worried you?
Again, I actually have to go back to the Vincent Antarctica trip. Because this trip for me was after the first Everest trip, and a part of my sort of skills acquisition, building up a foundation to be able to think about going back to Everest again. And we are incredibly remote down in Antarctica. And again, another memory from that one is before I even left Australia, there was a story, it was one of the Australian bases where a couple of young lads who were working on the base had gone out being silly on a couple of skidoos, and one of them's had an accident, smashed his pelvis to bits. And after 3 weeks, he's stable but in a critical condition, and he's still stuck down there on the base because they couldn't get in to airlift him out. So I've got this sort of story that had happened just before I left, which just really brought home to me how remote a place I was going, in that if something goes wrong, even if it seemed it would be minor here, it's huge down there.
Yeah, and especially I think, I assume you were leaving your children behind on this trip too. So there's that added fear, I guess, in the back of your mind that you're responsible for other people as
absolutely.
well.
And I've always promised, I am going to come home. It's not summit or die or anything like that. I will take all care that I can. But then, so having that story in mind from before I left on the Antarctic trip, there's this particular point in the trip where it was a part of the terrain that we had to go over again and again, several times, because we are load carrying up to another camp, and it was steep and it was ice, and the guide at one point said, "Oh, look, you don't want to fall that way because you die. Oh, that way, that way, just don't fall because you die." Right. And the ice just felt so unstable. It was sort of a snowy, crackly ice. And it was just horrible. And we're carrying really heavy loads up this steep ice with no ropes.
Sounds terrifying to me.
It was more deep breathing than any childbirth. It was every step, take it carefully, think about it. There's no way you catch a crampon, do just a momentary lapse was going to be bad. Just make sure every step was stable and steady.
So it was mentally exhausting as well.
And a heavy load on my back as well.
Yeah.
And I think we must have gone up and down that section at least several times. And that's not exaggerating. It feels like about 20 times, but seriously, it would have been 4 or 5. It was hell. Wow. Horrible.
And in terms of well-being, I'd like to just, expand on that a little bit, since this is a well-being podcast. So when you have taken a group of clients on a trek, have you noticed any positive impacts on them? Just as as personal observation of what you've seen?
Well, the sense of achievement of the experience that they've had, just because they're in an amazing place. But then you throw on top of that the fact that they're doing, especially the clients that have never done anything remotely like this before, the sense of achievement of the day after days of trekking, camping, no showers for however long. It's a big thing for a lot of people to achieve, and to see many of the clients that just were uncertain how they would go with those sorts of conditions come out the other end just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just leaping out of their skin with excitement at how they've come through it. And they've all had their low points, because there's some point in a trip that's, if it's long enough and it's high enough, you're going to feel like rubbish, as you would at some point.
Yeah. On the trek I did, there was 16 of us in the group, and I think at one point pretty much everybody was sick, usually with some kind of a sore chesty kind of thing, and just felt lousy. And no one got so sick they had to go back. But there was always, for everybody on the trip, there was a few days where they just thought, oh, what am I doing? Why am I here? This is hard.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's entirely normal. And even if you're not actually feeling sick, you'll just feel tired, because it's so out of the norm for the majority of people. So it's to see people that never knew that they could do something like that come through it with flying colours. There's a couple of clients in particular that I can think of that even when that you knew that they were just feeling so tired, you turn around and look at them, they'd give you a smile. And it was like, oh, they're getting through it. They're just soldiering on, and they're just being the best possible person they can be. It's very rewarding seeing clients do that.
Yeah. And I think for people, it does give them a sense of self-confidence when they've achieved a goal like that. They've really had to battle against the physical elements and the mental elements as well in many cases when you are feeling a bit lousy and you dream about being home in your nice soft bed.
Yeah, look, it really gives you a lot. We were talking about self-awareness right at the beginning or early on when we were chatting, that it makes you aware of what you can do and the barriers that you can just push on through that you wouldn't normally think in your nice day-to-day life at home that you could do that. And I think it gives you a new awareness of what you're capable of, and thus the confidence when you do come home to be able to push a bit harder and keep on track.
Yeah. I think also a really positive aspect of doing a trek is just being out in nature. I think that's because, it's so easy to be disconnected from nature in our day-to-day life, and just being fully immersed and camping in tents, and it really makes you feel good.
And you'd be able to provide the science and the links behind it, I'm sure. But there's so many studies have shown that just being outdoors, being outside, is just for your whole well-being has an enormous effect.
It does. And I think one of the things I loved about the trip I did in Nepal with my sister was just the vastness and the age of it all. It's so majestic, and you just feel like you're in this magical place, and you sort of know you're just a tiny piece of this big puzzle. It was just kind of awe-inspiring. I can't really find the right words to describe it, but there is something bigger than all of us out there. That's kind of how I felt.
No, I guess I agree completely. Again, I think I said it earlier on as well, that you just get a different perspective on what really is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apple certainly they coined the term first world problems. It's like, oh yeah, this doesn't work and the internet's not fast enough. You've been to Nepal and you see the conditions people live in with big smiles on their faces, and you go, yeah, first world problems.
Oh, absolutely. It does give you a very big dose of perspective, I think. Have you been influenced by the people you've come into contact with in terms of their spiritual beliefs like Buddhism and things like that? Has that had any impact on you over the years?
I certainly do love the Buddhist approach. I guess personally, for my own beliefs, I do struggle with some of the concepts, but
me too. Like karma is the one I can't get my head around. But anyway. Sorry.
And I don't know, I'm a bit of a believer in karma. There are times when I really hope karma is a thing. But certainly the belief in being good to people, being open, being the best person you can. There's certainly a lot of beliefs in there that I try and live within my life. But I guess I think it's just it probably just comes down to a very basic love of nature, and that becomes my religion.
As you can tell from our conversation so far, Katie is motivated and goal-driven. When her planned trip to the North Pole was cancelled this year, she needed another challenge. So why not do an Ironman, even if she has a fused ankle? So next, we chat about that.
I needed a goal, and it seemed that the most likely thing that I could aim for, that I could do, that at some point would be available, would be an Ironman. So having had a look at the calendar, having done two, I figured, well, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I know what I'm in for, but it meant that, having looked at the calendar, I thought, well, I can hope for one in September. If that is actually able to be run, I'm aiming for that. If not, December.
Do you put together your own training plan, or do you have someone who does that for you?
An Ironman is something that is a little bit too big for me. So anything else, I will train myself. An Ironman is a lot more specific. And yes, I had an Ironman coach when I did the 2 a few years ago, and so I've re-engaged his services to thrash me.
Yes, I do the same. I have a coach, Nick Muxlow, his name is. He's been on the podcast a few times. Finally, it's probably time to wrap up now. I like to ask all my guests if you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be? Just any 2 things.
Absolutely, the easy one is get outdoors. Just every opportunity. If you can only walk around the block, then walk around the block. But if you can get a little bit further afield into parklands or even better, the hills, just that is just such an amazing thing. And if you can't get out to walk, hopefully you can run. Running for me, which these days it's my treat. It's because of my ankle, but it is my therapy. It's the most wonderful.
Totally agree.
So getting out and getting moving, I just think it's good for everything. It really is. It's good for mental well-being, physical well-being. It's something that should be in everybody's life. However they can do it, they don't have to be running 3-minute kilometres or whatever. It's just getting out and moving, whatever you can do. That's an absolute essential as far as I'm concerned. And then I guess the second one is don't underestimate yourself.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Give things a go. And I think I talked about this before, but yeah, as I said, don't underestimate yourself. Have some self-awareness, but you're never going to learn by only attempting things that you can do easily. When you fail something, how much do you learn?
Yeah, very true.
You learn a lot from when you actually don't succeed. So have a go, and you'll either succeed or you'll learn a lot.
Yes, and possibly try again.
Exactly.
So, Katie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you.
Absolute pleasure, Amanda. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for listening today. What an impressive person. What I liked about listening to Katie's story is her obvious determination and the methodical way she achieves her goals. She wanted to climb Everest, so she set about acquiring the skills to give herself the best chance of success. I think that's probably a very good way to approach most goals that you have in your life. I will put a link to Sarah Mountain Journey's website in the show notes, where you can see the kinds of trips that they have offered. So you can subscribe to my podcast, Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, and while you're there, click on the bell to be alerted when new episodes are available. You can also subscribe on your favourite podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Direct links to all social media can be found on the subscribe page of my website at www.amandaswellbeingpodcast.com. If you would like to contact me, you can send me a message via the contacts page on my website. Please do feel free to suggest topics that you'd like to learn more about or people that you'd like to hear interviewed, and I will do my best to deliver that to you. Producing the podcast is a labour of love. We put in a lot of time, money, and effort behind the scenes. So if you enjoy Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast and would like to make a contribution, you can do so via Patreon, PayPal, or by Amazon. Simply go to the contribute page on my website. I'd also like to let you know that I am taking a short 3-week season break to give myself some time to work on some good new content for you. Finally, please take a minute to leave a rating on iTunes. It improves visibility and will help me source excellent guests. Thank you for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.